The moment you get something, a product or some other thing, you want to rely on this product or thing to be exactly what you expect. It's important to understand that something is genuine, that something is real, that it is what it pretends to be. The Veracity Lab is a group of researchers that are working on technologies to ensure high veracity in everything we do. Whenever we have a situation that we have to trust that something is genuine, they want to bring technologies into the world that allow us to verify the situation and do it in that very moment. Technology is in everything we do these days. What these researchers do is they are looking at all the little pieces of technology that we meet throughout our day to inject new components or new mechanisms to ensure a higher degree of veracity. In this video, we're talking to some of the researchers and other partners involved in this wider area of work. And these researchers are going to talk about their very specific working area to explain the concept of veracity and its importance to our everyday life in an accessible way. The first person we're talking to is Professor Steve Reeves. Steve is going to talk about the big tech paradox. Can we really trust big tech companies to have our best interest at heart?
My role in the Veracity Project has been to explore the meaning of the word veracity by building logics which allow us to explore the idea formally and in the end build tools which have veracity, whatever that turns out to mean. Trust, demonstrability, truth and authenticity, those four components, I think they're good ways of thinking about actually what the word means for people. Culturally, we all tend to be the same when it comes to digital in that, for instance, we trust it because it's digital, even in the face of our own experience. And that's been a remarkable success in changing culture by, the big tech companies, right? They have taught us, because there's no alternative, to accept the way that they build things. And one of the big successes they've had is convincing us to trust them. Again, in face of all the evidence that we shouldn't. Because all of these fears we currently have really have their root in the fact that at the end of the line are companies who are making money out of our information. And that's what you have to get away from to solve the problem, I think. In the end, if we've got veracity, we can build systems that people can both use but also trust in all sorts of ways. Trust with their information, trust the people at the other end of the transaction, and not have the fears that people obviously currently do fear. Encouraging other solutions which actually people get to use, I think is a really important thing, and hopefully something this project can contribute to.
Next, we're going to talk to Dr. Kelly Blinko. Kelly is going to talk about bias in technology. Now, human bias is all the preconceptions that may exist about the world and stereotypes that may stem from past experiences or data that exists about something. And sometimes these preconceptions make it into technologies such as artificial intelligence. Now, what problems does that create?
The tech industry, as you might know, is not very diverse. So if we have a homogeneous group of people creating the software and not really thinking about the perspectives and the way that other people would use the software, they can create software that's not going to be usable for everybody in society. I'm Kelly Blinko. I'm a senior lecturer at the University of Auckland and one of the researchers on the Veracity Project. I look at the elements of, people create software and how can we make that process better, but also that people use software and how can we make sure that we're really making software so that it's usable for everybody.
Do we see that specifically important or in a different way important in the context of AI?
It's a little bit different. It's certainly still really important, but AI, some people would think, is neutral, right? It's learning purely from the data, and so it wouldn't have bias. But actually, AI can amplify bias because it's learning from historical data that people have created with bias. So if there's biased data that AI is learning from, it actually makes the bias even more prominent. So AI can actually cause more discriminatory type software. So we've seen examples where software has been taken off the shelf. It no longer exists because people have found that there's bias in it. Things like the Amazon recruitment tool, where it was automatically filtering CVs and getting rid of women applicants because its data was from the people that already worked there, and they tended to be men. And so it was learning from men's CVs and filtering out the women's. And other things like the Twitter photo cropping AI, which tended to crop out people that didn't have white faces because it had been trained primarily on white faces. And these tools don't exist anymore. They stopped using them. That's only because the crowd made lots of noise, but not because somebody could actually go and complain to the software system that there was problems.
Should there be enforcement or requirement of this ability to complain?
So that's something that our team at Veracity is looking into right now, is what would that look like? How would we actually tell an AI system that we disagree, that this response isn't acceptable? And we're looking from a broad range of people to see how they would want to interact with AI systems so that we can make it usable for everybody in society, and that we can have this mechanism for disagreement that's broadly able to be used by society.
Next, we're going to talk to Kevin Chetlock. Kevin is going to talk about the fact that technologies are developed in a globalized environment, but that they are very, very unique and important perspectives by Maori and other Indigenous communities.
This notion of trust and truthfulness and authenticity, having tino rangatiratanga, or the opportunity to actually have say over our artefacts, is one way of actually ensuring that we're not being colonised in some way, but we're able to control our environment, our digital environment, as we would on our maraes, as we would in our papakainga homes, as we would with our own families. And that's basically a right for all people in all lived spaces.
If I relate that to things like ChatGPT, Facebook, all of those things seem to contradict all of those principles, right? Because they go and take data, you have to put it somewhere, and then the ownership transfers by design almost, right? Is there still reason to be positive about that we can actually break that up?
Yes, I think there is. I think as humans, we should have the choice and the right to actually provide feedback to them. Yes, our mokopono and our rangatahi live on gaming engines, and they live on social media sites. But that doesn't mean to say we can't actually provide pressure on top of them to actually say what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. If we allow these larger companies to actually behave in a monolithic, in a self-governing mode, then they'll continue to do what they do. So I guess the input of mātauranga is about a contribution to that debate. We're actually thinking about how does humanity sees itself in the next 50, 100, 150 years. And so I don't think we should be thinking about automating ourselves so quickly without having that discussion and having that discussion on what our humanity looks like. And for Māori and for Indigenous peoples, but for Māori, it's about being part of that discussion. It's about being part of the journey to make sure that we are part of the group that are voicing either our support or our concerns as we move forward. Definitely here in New Zealand anyway.
Next, we're going to talk to Professor Matthias Garster. Matthias is going to talk about why the solution to veracity is actually much more complex than we think because of the multi-layered nature of technology. Within the Veracity project, we're talking about veracity being a full stack problem. What is a stack?
So imagine your app that you use for online banking, for example. You see graphical user interface, you can interact with your bank account, you can apply for loans, you may transfer money. So that's one layer of the stack. It's the layer which actually allows us to do things. So you may, for example, apply for a home loan, and the app may decide, well, do I get the loan or not? Or what kind of amount can I get for the loan? So that would be another layer of stack. And then below that, well, there might be another layer, which is the data. You have a certain amount of money on your account. You may have actually different accounts. So that would be a third layer in the example of the banking app. There are different technologies used to implement each of these three layers, which means that when it comes to veracity, well, we have to deal with veracity of the actual data. This is one layer of the stack. But then we also have to deal with veracity of the algorithms that may manipulate or change the data or help us to perform operations on the data. And then, to taking it back to the highest level of the stack, let's say the user interface, well, what happens when the users, for example, the customer or client of a bank, when they see their account information, do they trust it? If they don't trust it, or coming back to the example of the home loan application, if I apply for a home loan and I do not get the amount for my home loan that I want to, can I actually go back to the bank and say, hey, why is this? Why don't I get a loan in the first place, or why do I not get the amount of money I actually asked for in the first place? So how can we actually enable the users of software-based technology to understand and potentially contest decisions or software-based or technology-based decisions that are made and that affect them? So, which means veracity becomes, it's not only a technical problem, but it's a socio-technical problem. And it also involves human factors as well.
Next up is Professor David Ayers. And David is going to talk about how you build technologies that return control over data back to the users.
I have focused over my career technically detailed operating system security concepts, but I have an interest in distributed systems, which is where you have multiple computers coordinating what they do across networks. What's interesting for me in the Veracity project is looking upwards towards the actual human needs in such a system. How do you take these detailed technical mechanisms and actually use them for the sake of achieving useful human ends in terms of system behavior? If you look at systems to do with, say, healthcare or taxation, governments manage large repositories of information, but often in these particular silos that can't connect to the units of government, and often in contexts where the government would be seen to be the clear owner of that kind of data. What I think is emerging is a more decentralized notion where you could say, we want ad hoc collaborations to be able to participate in that kind of national scale data interaction.
What is the Veracity perspective as to why that might be necessary?
It relates to trust, I guess. If you're looking at where and how you're defining the types of trust in your infrastructure, there's a big difference between defining a central organization that you submit your data to versus having lots of interacting participants. One example where I think you can see that is probably in supply chain interactions, where be they within the country or be they international, you have different groups that are in different contexts, both collaborating but yet in competition. And so at different points of an interaction, you need to consider, when do I want to openly share data? When might I want to share evidence that I have certain data that I'm not going to openly share because it's not useful for me or you or both to do that now? You've got the management of that kind of protocol. And so I think that will be an interesting case where the Veracity technology is, how can you define the ways that you establish trust between these interacting participants and organizations up to the point they need at that stage in the protocol?
Next, we're going to talk to Bren Hoare, who is taking the technically complex topic of veracity into the real world, explaining how the historically quite complex area of organics products can actually be supported by technology that increases the ability of people to verify that something that claims to be an organic product is actually an organic product.
Organics, in the 70s it was designed a system of protecting consumer from a claim being organic, and really not a lot's changed. There's about 8 steps in the organic supply chain, from an input all the way through to a trust with the consumer, and each of those steps really has a blind spot that's being built on trust and an analog system. Organic is the fastest growing multi-food sector in the world. It's created a lot of attention, and with that has come fraud. That's put a lot of pressure on those systems. So really where the opportunity of Veracity comes in is to modernise that and to use digital and data and the systems that we create with Veracity to help solve those problems right throughout the supply chain.
If we fix it for the organic supply chain, does the problem translate to other areas that matter to New Zealand?
So one of the great things about the organic supply chain, it's not just about produce, it's also about manufactured products. And that supply chain, it's from bottles of wine to carrots to feminine hygiene, you name it, the organic sector holds. It's a full market share. So there's a lot to learn. You name the market segment, the organic is represented in it. And so there's learning for everybody in this pilot.
Is there a chance for New Zealand to be recognised as leading if we get this right?
So that's a really good point. New Zealand's consistently been seen as a leader in organic. Our certification systems are in the top 5, 10 of the world that actually develop these. But we were one of the last to actually regulate. So sometimes being last means that we can be first because we can use that digital system and leapfrog everybody else's system. That's the potential. That's certainly the desire of the team, is to really understand what that would mean. It would also understand what it would mean for regulation, and this is what we've explored: regulatory veracity, fiscal veracity, brand veracity. It's not just a single type, it's about really understanding the whole system, being able to measure and then get the data on that. So it's quite exciting to be a world leader in that. It's a great challenge, and I think we're up for it.
We're now going to talk to Peka, and Tim is going to give us the perspective of what it means for a New Zealand tech business to collaborate very closely with the researchers within the Veracity Lab.
From an industry perspective, when we build products, we're about human-centered design. We're understanding jobs to be done, challenges, and how might we solve those challenges. Veracity underpins everything we do. At Rush Digital, we design and build technology products, and so our role in this project is really working with the researchers in such a way that we can ideate and create novel ideas and then practically roll those out as demonstrators of how we apply Veracity technology. So a lot of what we do as a digital design and technology company is make sure that we're actually presenting the artifact or the piece of data authentically around a narrative that the originator wants to create with that. So think about a piece of artwork, right? I think there's a bigger story than a carving or a painting. It's actually around the story behind the inspiration. It's around the story of the creation. So I think in terms of data, is exactly the same thing.
But when we're looking at social networks, for example, they are really not built around those principles, are they?
No.
Do you think there is a positive way out of this?
Absolutely. This, I believe, is exactly why the Veracity project exists, right? We've got research on gaps in veracity and technologies that are coming through that might be able to be applied to those existing products and systems to improve veracity, so that then those products can actually then tell a more authentic story, that data can be presented in the right context, and then from an industry perspective, we can leverage that technology to build better products and build better experiences and narratives for the end users, so that we can apply veracity to improve, everyday lives of Kiwis.
Does New Zealand have the capacity to do that at the really industry scale system?
Oh, absolutely. I think New Zealand's got some of the best designers, the best technologies in the world. So there's no problem with that. I think as well as that, we have a global world view. We also have a very risk-adverse view from a technology standpoint. And interesting, being geographically apart from the rest of the world forces us to think that way. So when we're talking about some of the larger veracity topics with things like supply chains, we're always thinking in those terms, because a lot of our products and a lot of the data goes very far away from where we are.
Technology is already moving incredibly fast in its development, and it can be expected that over the next 10, 20, 30 years, this progress will only accelerate. We can't just let technical progress happen without a human element to that progress. The next 10 years are quite exciting to look at. I know they are scary for some people because people feel like technology is just happening to them. What the Veracity Lab work has shown is there's a lot of hope to be had, that there will be an increased awareness that it's possible to build technology on different principles. It's all about rebalancing control over what our technological future looks like. At the moment, you have those who can develop really advanced technologies and those who can use it. And what we want to see is that there's a level playing field again that enables all of us, smaller nations, to be really, really progressive contributors to high-tech futures without being dependent on single, very large digital companies.